the Tenderloin Museum, and whose home is the Cadillac Hotel and has been since 2015. And so we're excited to have an awesome crowd tonight. And many of you, I'm sure, may have had their own connections to the Cadillac over the years. And, you know, there's so many stories to tell about the hotel, and we hope that we can just introduce a few of those stories tonight. And we have a special treat because tonight we are joined by two people who are instrumental in the preservation and rehabilitation of the Cadillac back in the 80s. And that's Kathy Looper and Arnie Lerner, who are here with us today. So we're super excited to have them. Looks like we had almost 200 people sign up for tonight. So thank you so much for tuning in and supporting both of our organizations. And so just a few housekeeping items before we start. Everyone is muted on the webinar by default, but if you have a question throughout the program, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. The chat is open and we want people to chat with panelists and with one another. But if you use the Q&A button for questions specifically, it'll help us better keep track of those. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about SF Heritage first, and then jump right into the Cadillac's history. And then we'll hear a little bit, a few words from Katie Conry, the executive director of the Tenderloin Museum, who's here with us. And then we'll hear from our two special guests. So let me just jump right in. So, and first, as I begin this session, I would like to acknowledge that this virtual program is taking place throughout unceded territory of the United States, which is home to nearly 600 tribal nations, and that the Tenderloin Museum and San Francisco Heritage are on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. A land acknowledgement is a critical step towards working with Native communities to secure meaningful partnership and inclusion in the stewardship and protection of their cultural resources and homelands. And we're grateful for the guidance of the American Indian Cultural District here in San Francisco, who are leading efforts to preserve and share American Indian cultural heritage here in the city. And we join with them tonight to honor these ancestral grounds that we are gathered upon and to support the resilience and strength of all Indigenous people. And so just really quickly, a little bit about San Francisco Heritage. This year, we're celebrating 50 years of protecting and preserving San Francisco's architectural and cultural heritage. I'm Carrie Young, by the way, the Communications and Programs Manager at Heritage. And these images touch just a little bit on some of the things that we do. We advocate to preserve landmark buildings and legacy businesses in our city's neighborhoods, like the Trocadero in the Parkside and Sam Wo in Chinatown, Specs in North Beach, Dr. Rock in the Mission. We host events and programs like these in partnership with those who are working every day to preserve the history and heritage of their neighborhoods. We help steward the 1886 Haas Lilienthal House at the top in green. And we open the house up for tours and programs. And we also lead heritage hikes for third graders. And we also steward the Doolin Larson building on the iconic corner of Haight and Ashbury, which is not yet open to the public, but is currently home to our second ever artist in residence, the composer, Ben Jewel Volkis. And lastly, Heritage is a membership-based organization. So just consider joining to help support our work and stay in the loop on all things preservation. So that's where you can visit to join. And so I'm gonna just jump right in, and Kathy and Arnie, they're free to chime in whenever. So the Cadillac Hotel is located in the Uptown Tenderloin Historic District on the northeast corner of Eddy and Leavenworth Streets. And you can see it here on this fun map from 1990 amidst other Tenderloin landmarks. And the Cadillac is San Francisco landmark number 176. And also just a quick shout out to the neighborhood newspapers of San Francisco project, from which this map is from. This is from the Tenderloin Times. The project is digitizing and making freely available neighborhood newspapers like the Tenderloin Times for free on the Internet Archive. So check it out. So after the 1906 earthquake destroyed large swaths of the city, including what is now the Tenderloin, San Francisco civic leaders wanted to show the city's resilience by promptly undertaking a series of building projects. And among the first new buildings to go up was the Cadillac in 1907. Andrew A. Louderback, who was in poultry, game, and distilling, and also a volunteer firefighter, he was the Cadillac's original owner. And he built the hotel on the same site where he had lived before the earthquake in a wooden house. So the Cadillac's construction really foreshadowed the development of the Tenderloin as a major residential neighborhood. And it was really indicative of the scale and the material of the district as it was to be rebuilt. And this is a really nice look at the building in around 1907 when it went up. So the 4-story brick hotel, it was designed by the architectural firm of Meyer and O'Brien in the Renaissance Baroque style with Art Nouveau influences, and a 3-part design, pretty unusual in apartment construction. The style was more common to, say, New York or Chicago rather than San Francisco. And a 1976 San Francisco survey of the Cadillac noted that, quote, a measured power or order results from such repetition of these 3 prominent parts. And I totally agree. And the Cadillac's huge size, it had 180 rooms when it was built, plus a ballroom, in addition to significant ground floor retail space, made it a really popular destination for those visiting the city on a short-term basis. But from the beginning, the Cadillac always had long-term residents. And the Tenderloin rose as a place of commerce and nightlife in the first half of the 20th century, and the Cadillac's prime location at its center made it really the place to be. And these were rich times in the Tenderloin's history, full of jazz clubs, restaurants, theaters, and through to the 1950s, revelers would converge on the Cadillac before nights on the town. And the Cadillac, even in these early days, once had its own full-time furrier to take care of, ladies' wraps while they stayed for weeks or even months at a time. And it had over 30 staff as well to serve its guests' every need. And Kathy had mentioned to me yesterday that in the 30s, the 180 rooms were divided up so that the number of rooms grew up to 200. And so for many years, beginning in 1924, the Cadillac's original grand ballroom was the home of Newman's Gym, reputed to be, the oldest professional boxing facility in the US and San Francisco's most famous training facility. The gym really flourished in the heyday of boxing in the Bay Area when San Francisco was a fight town. And nearly all the greats in boxing history trained here, from Cassius Clay before he was Muhammad Ali, to Jack Dempsey and Joe Louis and George Foreman and Sugar Ray Robinson, and even musician Miles Davis trained here before playing a show in 1971. That's him there on the left. And I like this fun quote from gym director Don Stewart, who said that Davis was a very capable boxer who would say to his sparring partners, quote, "Don't hit me in the face. I gotta play tonight." William Billy Newman, who's seen on the left here, with Cassius Clay, I believe when he was training for the 1960 Rome Olympics. Newman was the gym's namesake and co-owner starting in the 1940s. And before then, the gym was called Patty Ryan's. Newman was well known and respected by boxing professionals in and around the neighborhood and had a reputation for generosity, demonstrated numerous times by his assistance to fighters who couldn't afford gym fees or equipment. And Newman's wasn't just home to, the greats. Local heroes trained at Newman's too, like Jimmy Lester, a middleweight contender from San Francisco's Bayview district, also known as the Bayview Blaster. Lester was a star football player at Mission High and at Oakland's McClymonds High School before he fought his first pro boxing match in 1963. And in this really short KPIX clip from 1970, Lester, he talks about mentoring students at Washington High School, and you can see a few shots of him actually training inside of Newman's.
I mean, I do this from my heart because I want to see these youngsters grow with something in life, a bright future, and they do have it, and that's why I do it.
Last Monday night, Lester was successful in defeating Rocky Hernandez in a 10-round bout by a decision. He's been fighting for 7 years now. He works out at the Newman Herman Gym for his bouts, which are scheduled about once a month. If he sustains any body damage, he says his manager, Leo Levitt, who he has complete confidence in, postpones his next fight until he's in good physical condition.
So that's some really nice rare footage from inside of Newman's when it was still a gym. And so when the Loopers, who we'll hear about soon, purchased the Cadillac in 1976, they continued to lease the building's ballroom to Newman's until Billy Newman's death in 1983, after which the gym moved to a spot a few blocks away on Leavenworth. And then it finally closed in the early 1990s with the death of director Don Stewart. So all in all, Newman's is legendary, and I'm sure some of you watching might even remember visiting it or knew people that train there. Please, share your experiences in the chat. So as permanent middle-class residents, started leaving the Tenderloin after World War II, increasingly vacant hotels like the Cadillac became refuges for the neediest in the city. And by the 1960s, a number of social agencies appeared on the scene to serve this growing population. These are folks like the Salvation Army's Turk Street Center, Poverello Coffee House, and as we'll hear next, the Loopers Reality House West, who joined older Tenderloin institutions like the YMCA and Glide Memorial Church, the Women's Hotel, and others to support the needy. The Cadillac was acquired by a succession of owners during this time, and including an unknown man named Donald Fisher. And as some of you may know, Fisher went on to make billions after co-founding The Gap. According to Kathy, Fisher purchased the Cadillac kind of as a real estate speculator, thinking that the neighborhood was going to be redeveloped, but that didn't end up happening. A large part thanks to the Loopers' work in really fighting to keep the Tenderloin affordable. But during his ownership, Fisher probably did more to destroy the building's architecture than any other previous owner. And he really removed some of the hotel's historic architectural details, like the ornate street level columns that you can see here in that earlier photo of the hotel. But Arnie will tell you a little bit later that this is a potential project to restore these columns that could be in the Cadillac's future. So according to Randy Shaw, the executive director of the Tenderloin Housing Clinic, had Fisher not soon sold the Cadillac, he could have turned the entire building into the architectural equivalent of a Motel 6. But fortunately for everybody, Fisher sold the hotel, first to John Foggy, who then sold it to Leroy and Kathy Looper in 1976, signaling a turning point for the Cadillac and for the Tenderloin as a whole. And so the Cadillac Hotel, it's the first single resident occupancies, or SROs, owned by a nonprofit. And the Loopers purchased it under their nonprofit, Reality House West, with the aim of running a housing program for at-risk populations. So while today SROs are seen as an essential low-cost housing resource for single adults, few saw much value in SROs back in the 70s, but it was Leroy and Kathy's transformation of the Cadillac that demonstrated the possibilities of using this historic housing resource to address San Francisco's affordable housing problem. And I just want to give a quick shout out to Kathy for her awesome Ruth Bader Ginsburg outfit in this photo, where her and Leroy are hosting a garden party at their home in 1990. The resemblance to RBG is uncanny, so congrats, Kathy. This is awesome. So when Kathy and Leroy moved into the Cadillac in the late 70s, really only a handful of its rooms were habitable. They made basic repairs over the next several years using private donations and foundation grants. But then in 1984 and 1985, the Loopers engaged San Francisco Heritage's Preservation Loan and Technical Assistance Program to rehabilitate the Cadillac, and really providing a more substantial renovation that our special guest, Arnie Lerner, was a key contributor to.
Just that's me on the bottom row, second from the left.
Yeah, and he's second from the left, bottom row, circa 1984. That's Arnie. As an example of what this partnership between the Loopers at the Cadillac and Heritage looked like, we can look to the work done through the same Preservation Loan and Technical Assistance Program to rehabilitate the Loopers' home on Guerrero Street around the same time. This home, known as Chateau Agape, as well as the John McMullen House, was where the Loopers ran an acclaimed board and care facility for low-income adults with intellectual disabilities. And here on this project, a range of partners from architects Arnie Lerner and Didier Repellon to the Victorian Alliance of San Francisco and Mission Housing Development Corporation, they all came together to work on interior and exterior architectural work and landscaping, on accessibility, and on landmark designation. So these were the types of partnerships that were formed for the work on the Cadillac Hotel. And overall, the goal of Heritage's Technical Assistance Program was to help retain low-income housing and provide stability to a number of community development target neighborhoods, which aligned with what the Loopers wanted for the Cadillac and for the Tenderloin. So Kathy and Arnie will talk a little more later about the rehabilitation of the Cadillac, but overall, this was an important project that provided affordable housing through historic preservation, and the Loopers' work at the Cadillac served as a model for San Francisco SROs, particularly during the 1980s when many were being threatened with demolition. And in the process of the renovation, with the help of Heritage, Reality House West also had the building designated a city landmark in 1984. And Leroy Looper, who passed away in 2011, he leaves an inspiring legacy in the Tenderloin. In addition to his work with Kathy at the Cadillac, he initiated the rezoning of the Tenderloin in 1981 that preserved its residential status, started the area's first anti-crime group. He helped secure a Tenderloin school and so much more under the moniker he was given as the mayor of the Tenderloin. And Randy Shaw, again, called Leroy, quote, a brilliant man and the most street savvy guy you could ever come across. And it was never about money with him, and he was always about helping people. And so if Probably not many of you know that there is a Sizzler in the Cadillac's history. And the 1980s, they really brought on a financial squeeze that threatened many inner city nonprofits like the Loopers Reality House West, with the government cutting back on funding for social services, for example. And so the Loopers, like other nonprofits at the time, responded by going into business, running for-profit ventures. And so a few years after the Cadillac's rehabilitation, they chose to open the city's only Sizzler in the Cadillac's commercial space to provide desperately needed jobs in the neighborhood. And for many of you who remember, or Sizzler's still around, like I do, just growing up, Sizzler is like an American style restaurant, buffet style. It's, you know, all you can eat, and I only have fond memories of Sizzlers. And so when asked by the Tenderloin Times why Reality House West chose to open a Sizzler in the Cadillac, the nonprofit's administrator, Richard Livingston, said that, quote, "We chose the Tenderloin because we wanted to make a difference in the community. We've created jobs that young people without a resume can get into, and we've made a visual statement about commitment in the Tenderloin." But a project that was conceived as the Tenderloin was rising really didn't open until the federal government had reversed the neighborhood's progress by withdrawing money for housing and economic projects, and the restaurant became less and less viable, and it closed in June of 1991. So the Sizzler's closure was a major setback to the Loopers' hopes for the Tenderloin, but the commercial space's next big chapter is much brighter. And just as a side note, I wanted to mention that in a testament to how much the community appreciated Leroy and Kathy's commitment to the neighborhood after the Sizzler closed and the couple had incurred, you know, $100K in debt from running the restaurant, community members really came out of the woodwork and for a one-night fundraiser and helped raise thousands of dollars, which I think is so lovely and wonderful. And so fast forward to 15 years, and today the Cadillac's commercial space is now home to the Tenderloin Museum, which occupies the building's first 2 floors. And so the museum was originally founded in 2009 as Uptown Tenderloin Incorporated, a nonprofit focused on heightening the public's knowledge and appreciation of the Tenderloin's history. Uptown Tenderloin sponsored the application that created the National Uptown Tenderloin Historic District, which includes 409 buildings on the National Registry of Historic Places, as well as the effort to install nearly 100 historic plaques throughout the neighborhood, including 9 lost landmarks. So a permanent museum built to honor the neighborhood was really the next logical step, and the Tenderloin Museum opened in 2015. So exhibits at the Tenderloin Museum illuminate the neighborhood's historic role as an entertainment hub, a film and music recording center, and the spot where many local grassroots movements began, including labor unions, San Francisco's LGBT movements, and of course, SRO and tenant rights activism. The Tenderloin Museum has really cemented their identity as a destination for community-based, historically inspired arts programs and neighborhood advocacy work. They lead popular walking tours on Tenderloin history, which during the pandemic have continued with safety measures in place, and they've also moved online as well. And Kathy Looper continues her and Leroy's legacy at the Cadillac by serving as the museum's board president and also the director of the Cadillac via their nonprofit, Reality House West. And a really fun note as well is that Kathy and Leroy started providing free concerts at the Cadillac in 2007. And after Leroy's death, Kathy continues them today. This carries on the couple's legacy of overseeing flourishing arts programming during their time running the hotel together, which included jazz concerts, theater shows from the Cadillac Players, art exhibitions, and more since the 1980s. These concerts at the Cadillac, featuring a rare 1884 Steinway donated in the name of the late community activist and longtime Cadillac volunteer, Patricia Walkup. They have been on hold since March, but hopefully they will be returning sometime later this year. And so this is a highly recommended way of experiencing this historic place. So just please keep an eye out for when the concerts at the Cadillac will resume, and definitely check them out. And we'll hear in a minute about another example of site-specific art at the Cadillac from Katie in a sec. So just in closing, overall these concerts and the Tenderloin Museum are really a fitting tribute to the Loopers' commitment to preserving the Tenderloin's rich history for everyone. And so much can be said of their contributions, not only to historic preservation, but to the Tenderloin as a whole. And they really gave the Tenderloin credibility and leadership, and the Cadillac is the crown jewel in their legacy as champions of supportive housing. And Leroy, he made sure that tenants and landlords and small businesses and international corporations and everybody in the community got along. And I really think that it's a message that has served the Tenderloin well to this day. And so now I just wanted to hand it off to Katie Conry, the Executive Director of the Tenderloin Museum.
Thanks so much, Carrie, for that great introduction about the Tenderloin Museum, and obviously all of that amazing history about the Cadillac. And thanks to all 116 of you for joining us this evening and your interest. I wanted to just share briefly about one large-scale art and history project that we produced. And between the Tenderloin Museum and the Cadillac Hotel, this has been our deepest collaboration. I mean, other than the fact that we are literally in the ground floor of the Cadillac Hotel. So we are constantly in an ongoing collaboration. But Tender was produced by the Tenderloin Museum in 2018 with Flyaway Productions. And Tender was an aerial dance about Tenderloin history that took place on the Cadillac Hotel, so in the air and on the building. And the choreography explored the neighborhood's history of outcast activism as told through 4 different dances. The first evoked early feminist activism in the 1900s, then transgender activism in the 1970s, advocacy by the Southeast Asian refugees in the 70s, and finally the housing rights movement in the 70s and 80s, specifically centered on the Cadillac Hotel, which is where the dance took place. So Tender was choreographed and led by Joe Kreider of Flyaway Productions. And in 2018, there were 10 performances of Tender over 2 weekends for a crowd of over 3,000 people. So we're gonna just watch a selection right now of the last dance in the performance that was called Kathy's Dance, that honors Kathy Looper. And this dance features oral histories of several residents of the Cadillac Hotel. And right before the selection I'm about to play starts, one of the residents of the Cadillac named Mary is interviewed as saying, "I have the best place," when referring to her room at the Cadillac. So we're gonna get this rolling. It's just a few minutes long.
Open the window, I can see it. I can see through everyone, to any people like my family, because we look out for each other. And it's like a little community. And I have a little place right there. And I'm grateful for this place. I
Well, thanks so much for watching that clip with us. And without further ado, we're going to turn things over to Arnie and Kathy. So Kathy Looper is the Cadillac Hotel co-founder and the Tenderloin Museum board president. And Arnie Lerner is SF Heritage former staff architect who worked on the Cadillac's 1977 restoration. So I want to give you both a chance to speak, but I mean, Kathy, I just want to also just hear your reactions about Tender.
I think Tenure was one of the greatest projects that ever happened at the Cadillac and the Tenderloin. It brought in thousands of people and highlighted our community so beautifully. And the fact that you involved residents of the Tenderloin in the performances, Joe Crowder did a phenomenal job. And I can't stress that enough. I was almost crying when I saw it. It was really beautiful. Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, it was amazing to see that history come to life like that.
I mean, I can't imagine what life would be like in the Tenderloin without art and culture. It's such a hard life. And if we have this kind of art, this kind of dance, this kind of music that comes into the Tenderloin, it softens the edges. It makes us more loving and kind, and makes us feel like we're part of the city. So I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Arnie, you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, yeah, sure. I came to San Francisco about the same time that the Loopers had purchased the building. Before that, I grew up in Kansas City, attended the University of Kansas, where I got my architecture degree, spent some, and after that was a Vista volunteer in Chicago, working on low-income housing projects. And when I went to Boston for a little while, then I came to San Francisco. And in '82, I got my license, and Marie Kennedy, who was working at Heritage on a program that provided architectural services to low-income homeowners and nonprofit groups that had historic buildings, was looking for an architect. And we had been having every month a breakfast over in Oakland with different architects that were outstanding in low-income housing. And she asked me if I wanted a job. And at first my reaction was negative. Like, I mean, I want to be working with an organization that deals with the community and is invested in that. And why would I want to go work for a preservation group? Because all they're interested in my mind was, to have nice coffee clatches with nice furnishings and so on, and not really involved. But I came anyway, and I quickly learned that the goals of preservation, which is to preserve community, and the goals of low-income housing was to preserve community, were exactly the same. And the group that I came upon at Heritage, that we worked as a team on the Cadillac and then Chateau Agape, included Grant DeHart, who was the executive director, and I think a very visionary guy who saw immediately that if preservation and heritage wanted to have any kind of clout in political kinds of issues, they needed to form alliances with neighborhood groups and nonprofit groups. And then the architect that I worked with was a French architect, Didier Repleon, who was working as the chief architect of historic monuments in all of France, and was taking a 2-year sabbatical. And he had come to Heritage and set up shop about 3 weeks before I got there. And the architectural historian was Michael Corbett. So to me, this was like, looking back on it, was kind of the dream team of preservation professionals to work with. And so my first project was the Cadillac Hotel, and I was in very familiar circumstances compared to where I worked in Chicago. And so it was just great. So that's how that all started.
Mm-hmm. That was a happy collaboration that continues to this day, Arnie. Thank you.
That's true. Randy Shaw, I think it was a few years ago, a couple of years ago, we had, well, actually the drawings that we did for the Cadillac were probably a combination of drawing styles that you'll probably never seen before. Didier, coming from France, drew everything only in ink. And of course, I drew only everything in pencil. And so we combined those two to present, to put forth a set of construction documents with a combination of those styles. And included in what he did was full-size drawings of the capitals and the ornament that Fisher had removed from the building, which proved to be too expensive at that time, back in the 70s. A few years ago, Randy Shaw asked me to see if what the cost might be today and whether that could be funded. And it was still a little bit too much, but the drawings are there, and for maybe some sort of a future collaboration to get the building further restored to its past grandeur.
Mm-hmm.
All
we need is money.
All we need is money.
Happy, why did you and Leroy decide to buy the Cadillac specifically? What brought you to the space?
It was just like everything in our lives, everything fell together at the right time in the right place. Leroy met John Foggy, who was a Black entrepreneur, and he had just bought the Cadillac and he wanted to get rid of it. And he said to Leroy, "You should buy it." And Leroy said, "Well, I don't have any money." He said, "Oh, don't worry about that. We'll work it out." And he had a first mortgage with Crocker Bank. And this was when Crocker Bank was owned by the Crocker family. And Charles Crocker was the president of the bank. Leroy and John Foggy went down to Crocker Bank and asked to see Charles Crocker. And Charles Crocker gave us a 15% loan that was non-assumable for 7% and let us assume the loan. And that's how we were able to get our foot in the door. And then John Foggy gave us 3 years where we didn't pay rent to him. We didn't have to pay anything towards our mortgage because there were only 30 rooms. There was no income coming in the hotel, and he didn't want us to fail. He literally did not want the building back. So he gave us 3 years of subsidized mortgage payments for us to be able to keep that hotel and keep it going. I mean, this is a only in San Francisco story. It probably would never happen now.
And can you tell us a little bit about just the state of the Cadillac, when you first arrived? What was it like? What was the build? What did the building look like? What did you have in your hands?
Well, it was typical of what all the buildings looked like in the Tenderloin. They were buildings that had bought by speculators who had vacated them. There was hardly any storefronts that were open other than bars and storefront churches. And we only had 30 residents in the whole building. So, and the only storefront was the liquor store, which we promptly closed. And they moved across the street. We had no sinks, no heat in the rooms. Half the rooms didn't have windows. The storefronts were in a bad shape. They were terrible. And slowly, through different grants, we were able to fix them up and fill them up with rooms. And it also one floor became a halfway house for federal prisoners, where we got people out of jail early and they lived in there. And Leroy likened that to the foxes taking care of the hens. The foxes being the cons and the hens being the senior citizens that lived there. And I think my longest living resident had moved in 1956. And this was Mr. Robert Mathena. And he died, I think, 3 years ago. So he had been there longer than we had. And he had seen all kinds of things happen in the Tenderloin. Until he lost his memory, he used to tell me all these great stories.
For both of you, why is Why is historic preservation of the Cadillac important?
I'm going to let Arnie go first, and I'll fill in.
Well, it's a role model for other developers and people working in the Tenderloin. It's the heart of the Tenderloin, and is an example of what can be done and the value of it. Some of the stories that come out of it help define that. I remember talking with Richard Livingston at the time about why it was important to keep the seniors housing there. And he said he had seen numerous times where a senior got moved out of the Tenderloin, the Cadillac, and within almost no time, they either died or were just severely in trouble because of this taken out of their surroundings that they were really familiar with, and especially at the Cadillac where you had the fox taking care of the hens, the residents who were former inmates did provide some protection and some sense of safety for those. So in other words, so it just was really for those reasons that it's important.
I'm going to chime in and say that one of Arnie's statements about historic preservation, preserving a sense of community, is one of the reasons. By rezoning the area, by having historic buildings all over the place, makes it harder for things to be demolished and skyscrapers to be built. And at the time when we bought the Cadillac, redevelopment was a real option still. It hadn't come through, but people were still talking about it. And we were concerned that it would be another financial center. All these buildings with all these people that were now living in it, would be destroyed. So for us, it was important that we put layer on layer of preservation to make sure that this housing stock was preserved forever. And it gives us a sense of neighborhood pride, of dignity. It gives us a sense of our history. So many of these kids that had come from Cambodia and Vietnam were growing up in an area and hating the Tenderloin because they didn't understand how rich it was. And we both felt that it was important for them to understand the history and see how they can contribute back to the Tenderloin, which they have. They've become storefront owners. They've bought their own hotels. I mean, it really helps preserve a sense of true community.
Absolutely. Do you feel like this, what can we learn about this for the future of affordable housing?
Well, you got to preserve the housing. I mean, I'm a native San Francisco, Katie, and I've lived in San Francisco all my life. When they tore the Fillmore down, it took 20, 30 years to rebuild it. And it's not ever been the same. It was vital. It was alive. It was a true sense of community. There were jazz clubs and everything. They tore it all down. And what do we have? We have storefronts that can't maintain tenants. We have people who live in giant buildings who have no sense of community. This is why it's important to preserve the housing, because you never get it back. You can't. It would take years to get this back. And it would never reach the vitality that it has today.
And even going beyond historical qualities of the buildings, I mean, I've always believed that buildings are embedded with history, and it's that common experience that builds and binds communities together, no matter, that goes beyond the architecture. But just what happened there, that's what keeps communities together.
Absolutely. We did have a question from one of our guests that, Kathy, I'd like to know more about you and Leroy's history. How did you come to this kind of work?
Well, I didn't come here easily. My mother and father are immigrants from Greece. My father was born in 1898 and my mother in 1909. And they came with the village Greek attitude that little girls should never be exposed to anything. So I went to girls' schools pretty much all my life until I went to state college. And just about when I started going to state college in my sophomore year, they had a state strike. And I didn't want to not be part of it. I wanted to be a part of it. And one of the things everyone said was, you can go volunteer in an agency. And that's what I did. I volunteered at this new drug rehab center on Fillmore on the corner of Ellis Street and Fillmore. And it was Reality House. And Leroy had just started it. And it was a drug rehabilitation center. It was a detox center, actually. And that's how I got my foot into working in the community and working with people and meeting Leroy, and the rest is kind of like history. I consider it one of the best things that ever happened to me. Yeah. My mother didn't like it, but I thought it was phenomenal.
Well, you certainly have a lot of fans at the event this evening. I'll make sure to send you that if you haven't been seeing it. But
I haven't been seeing it. Yeah.
Okay. A lot of fans out there. A lot of Kathy fans.
Okay.
Another question from the audience is, are there owners in the Tenderloin who follow the Loopers model and share their vision?
There are a lot of nonprofits who have followed our model. I can't say that for-profit hotel owners have, but there are a lot of nonprofits that have bought hotels and do the kind of work that we do in terms of housing preservation. I think the Cadillac is unique in the sense that we combine low-income housing with cultural events. We try to bring people into the hotel and involve our residents in some of these things. So I think that's what makes us unique. And I don't know of too many other places that do it. I can't think of one.
Yeah, the Cadillac's so lucky in that it has like a common area. That's pretty rare in an SRO.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really looking forward to the concert starting up again, and people like hearing from that 1884 the piano. It has its whole backstory, and
It
was in a
does.
castle. It was like in a castle, and it traveled all the way to the Cadillac, and and it has its own story, which is pretty awesome. But I hope people can.
I want to mention that our concerts are free. No one gets paid. The performers are professional performers. They come and they share their talent and their love of music with us. We have a wonderful gentleman called Lee Walkup who lives in Connecticut, who produces videos, and they're all on our website. Anyone who wants to come, it's open to anyone. And the concerts are amazing. I want to see them come back too quickly, safely.
Very exciting to think about.
Mm-hmm.
So many ways. We had a couple of different questions about how many residents live at the Cadillac and also how the Cadillac got its name.
The Cadillac was always the Cadillac Hotel. Being Black, people thought that Leroy named the Cadillac, because Black people liked Cadillacs in the 60s and 70s. Nope, it was named the Cadillac Hotel. Hotel Cadillac is what it was called from the very beginning. And we have I would say right now, about 140 some odd residents. So we have some rooms set aside for counselors and staff. We have some rooms set aside for managers' rooms. We have some supply rooms that we have. And so it's not the 180 that we originally had.
Someone was wondering about how Leroy and I would say the Loopers developed their life philosophy that led to this work, this approach of work.
Well, I came out of all the Catholic girls' schools. That's all we were taught. We were always taught to give back to the community. And that was just how I grew up. Leroy, on the other hand, grew up as an ex-addict. And in order to rid himself of his heroin habit, he had to go back to jail because there were no rehab centers at the time. And he put himself in Rikers Island for 3 years so that he could detox. And when he came out, he was determined that he was going to make it easier for people like him. And at the time, there were two programs. At the time he got out, there were two programs, Daytop and Synanon. But they both accepted a lot of white people, not Black junkies from Harlem. So Leroy said, okay, I'm going to open up my rehab center in Harlem. And when he moved to San Francisco, he opened it up on Fillmore Street because this was the population he wanted to deal with. And then from there, it was just like different opportunities for us to do different programs.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question. Hey, Mom.
Hi.
Rumor is Reality House West was the first nonprofit to own an SRO hotel. What would you say about that legacy? Also, hello, Arnie. It's Isan.
Oh. Isan is my son. Let's see. The Cadillac was the first SRO west of the Mississippi to do the low-income housing, SRO housing. And we're the first ones in the city and actually encouraged other programs, nonprofits, to actually open up doors and buy these hotels.
And I just wanted to ask Arnie, can you just tell us a little bit more about just some of the help that you and Heritage provided the Loopers at the Cadillac during the rehabilitation? Like, can you just talk a little bit more about that, and how was it representative of the preservation loan and technical assistance program that Heritage was putting on at the time? I'd love to hear more about that.
Oh, well, it was a combination of Heritage trying to form relationships in the community, as well as a great restoration project that needed to be done, and the kind of one that said to everyone that preservation was not just for the idle rich; it was for everyone. And we had help from the staff that was there, but also from the National Trust and people chiming in, and certain specialists. And so it was like going back to school for me, because I really had no essential grounding in preservation. And so this is basically how I learned that. I mean, I've kind of learned, I got a bachelor of professional degree at Kansas, but no graduate school. So when I was a Vista volunteer in Chicago, that was my part of my graduate school. And I think that Cadillac was the next way up.
We were your PhD, Arnie.
My PhD. They were my PhD. You can learn things out there in the world that you can't get in school. And that's sort of how I learn things.
Yeah, Arnie, we have another question for you from an attendee. Do you feel that San Francisco has a special commitment to this flavor of preservation and community development compared to other places?
No, I would say so. I mean, I don't know what other places do, but it sure seemed to me, and it continues, that nonprofit housing groups and Kathy's resilience and really make it an important part of, and the way Heritage has also spread out from just buildings into cultural aspects of preservation, which really you'll find in the Tenderloin and so on, that I think is important.
We have another question from the audience. Can you talk a little bit about Leroy's efforts to prevent zoning changes in the Tenderloin in the 80s?
Oh, yeah. I think he joined Glide, St. Anthony's, and the Cadillac. Glide, St. Anthony's, and the Cadillac. And we felt that zoning was important in stopping development. So I think it's 6 floors or 8 floors you can go up, but that's about it. And that stopped like all talk about the financial center moving in or downtown expanding, or even at one time they were going to raise a whole block and put another convention center there. That stopped everything. So, and what we basically did was we gave away all our air rights, which are worth millions, by doing that to preserve the city and to preserve low-income housing and to preserve the Tenderloin. And fortunately, we had Dean Macris, who was in charge of planning, and he was a wonderful planning director. And he saw the vision and the wisdom in allowing us to petition the city to have the zoning kept at a low rate.
We did actually get a question about what's needed to preserve the Tenderloin. I mean, you were just talking about what already happened to preserve it. But I guess what would you think would need to in the future?
Me, I would like the Tenderloin to be livable. I would like for people to feel comfortable to go out at night and walk around their neighborhood. I'd like for people to feel that they're safe walking down the sidewalk. I'd like for our sidewalks and our storefronts to look like every other neighborhood, with some capital investment to help the storefront owners attract new businesses and keep their businesses viable. We just recently have had a business association. Up until this point, Leroy started one many years ago when we first bought the hotel, but that died and there's never been a replacement. It just restarted. Things that normal neighborhoods have, we don't have those opportunities. City Hall sometimes deliberately leaves the Tenderloin out of their planning and their money and everything else, and that's criminal.
So we have a question for Arnie. So interested to hear about the special touch or approach needed for these types of projects, both the Cadillac and the Chateau.
Well, it's starting with a good documentation of just what was really there, because the last thing you want to do is start creating history where history isn't there. And that involves not just going down to the library, but sort of looking at other kinds of sources. For example, the Chateau, we had really no idea what the entrance was like and whether there was, we heard that there was some sort of awnings and stuff. And so we found out that two sisters who were, I don't know, in their 80s or 90s that had grown up there, lived out in, I think it was Rossmore. And so we drove out there and they pulled out a suitcase of photos of the family standing in front of the building. And it was those photographs of what was back there that allowed us to do what we were doing in terms of being honest to what was really there, rather than create false history.
We got a message that said, "Hello all, Cadillac Hotel property manager here. What are some of the new positives to look forward to currently and the future of the Cadillac Hotel?"
Good question.
These future questions, yeah.
Yeah. Right now, COVID has kind of put a stop on a lot of things. So I would say right now, in the immediate future, not much. But I would like to see our exterior restored. Mm-hmm. It would make a big difference. What people don't realize about the Tenderloin is we are exactly in the middle of the Tenderloin. We are between two major intersections, Eddy and Leavenworth. We are the focal point of the Tenderloin. Restoring that building to look like what it used to look, or approximately look like, would be a tremendous thing. The only thing that's stopping us is money, and I'm hoping London Breed is looking at this right now and trying to figure out where to find some money to give us to do this great work.
We had a pretty specific question here. If you can tell us a bit about Sarah, the first Cadillac manager. Sarah
Kearney. Sarah was an amazing woman. She came all the way from New York to help Leroy when we bought the hotel. She was a personal friend of Leroy's. And she lived in the hotel. She went out every day with her broom and kind of shooed people away off the sidewalk. And if you notice the pictures, in the 70s and 80s, we didn't have people littering or loitering in the front of the Cadillac or on the block, because Sarah would literally do the entire block every day. She would literally sweep the whole block and developed relationships with people. Sarah was an amazing person. But she had retired from her civil service job when she came here, so she was elderly anyway. And she was our manager for about 15 years. And then she retired. She had a stroke.
Just a comment here. I serve as the wellness nurse at the Cadillac Hotel. I love my work at the Cadillac, and I love the residents with whom I interact. And I love Kathy Luper.
That's awfully sweet. That's Jane DeLeon. I love her too.
And so I think, so we're just a couple minutes after 7, but so Katie, do we have any last questions? I wonder if you can maybe answer 1 or 2 more, or and then just, you know, if Arnie and Kathy want to say anything in closing before we go.
Yeah,
So,
I think we're at a good stopping point. I mean, someone asked why is a building considered historic, and what are the benefits of landmarking a building?
mm-hmm. No, Arnie, if you want to take that one on, the preservationist. Oh, you're muted.
I think it's considered historic by its age, by its design, by its location, all those things. Its importance to the neighborhood, being in the center, and its size, and the forms, and some of the details are actually still there. They didn't rip all of them off. When they did the facade, because there was a column on the corner entrance to the museum. And if you look inside and up, you can see some of the originals. But it's that, and what it's meant to a lot of people, and it's their home, and which is what goes beyond preservation, goes beyond buildings and details, and for many times, you know, it's sort of what happened there, and that's which makes the Cadillac very important.
Oh, I want to add one small little thing. Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead lived at the Cadillac Hotel on the 3rd floor, folks. There were a lot of people who came through the Cadillac who were quite famous.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Love that.
History right at the Cadillac. You heard it here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much to SF Heritage for partnering with the Tenderloin Museum, and to Kathy and Arnie for joining us, and for all the amazing
Pleasure.
you've done and that you do.
Thank you so much, and just, you know, continue to support preservation and support the Tenderloin Museum, and hopefully all of us can, you know, get back to the Cadillac when they resume their concerts. And the Tenderloin Museum is now open, so you can visit it at any time, right, Katie? But,
that is absolutely correct. Thank you for reminding me to talk about that. We're currently open Wednesday through Saturday from 11 to 5, and you can book your ticket in advance or walk in. We're at 25% capacity right now.
Yeah. And Heritage's Haslenienthal House will be reopening in April. So if you would like to tour another historic landmark, then check it out.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kathy and Arnie and Katie and everybody watching. So
Thank you, Jerry.
Love it.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much. Have a lovely evening.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.